Tonight at 10, a second major tax U-turn and the sacking of the Chancellor. But Liz Truss remains under pressure from the markets and her own MPs. At a Downing Street press conference, she acknowledged the market turmoil and said a rise in corporation tax would now go ahead.
It is clear that parts of our mini-budget went further and faster than markets were expecting. So the way we are delivering our mission right now has to change.
Hello. Good afternoon.
Called back from Washington only to be fired, the now former Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng in office for less than 6 weeks. His replacement, the former Health Secretary Jeremy Hunt. He's the 4th UK Chancellor since the summer.
The Prime Minister has now binned 2 planks of her programme for government and her Chancellor. The question tonight is, can she survive?
After a day of dizzying developments in Westminster, we'll be looking at where this leaves the government's economic plan. Also on the programme, the faces of some of the children and young people who've been killed in the protests sweeping Iran. We have a special report. The Rugby World Cup kicks off in England tomorrow, with the men's, women's and wheelchair tournaments taking place at the same time.
Oh, hello. Sorry, don't wish to be rude, but I'm in no fit state to entertain today.
And Robbie Coltrane, who starred in Harry Potter and Cracker, has died aged 72.
And stay with us here on the BBC News Channel for continuing coverage and analysis from our team of correspondents in the UK and around the world.
Good evening. The Prime Minister remains under intense pressure tonight after announcing another major U-turn on tax and firing her Chancellor, as her economic growth plan and her political credibility are called into question. Following 3 weeks of turmoil on the markets after the government's mini-budget last month, Liz Truss announced that a rise in corporation tax would now go ahead, and she sacked Kwasi Kwarteng and replaced him with Jeremy Hunt. In a press conference lasting less than 9 minutes, Ms Truss was asked 4 times why she was remaining in her job, and some Conservative MPs are privately suggesting that she should resign. For our first report tonight, let's go straight to our political editor, Chris Mason, who's in Downing Street for us. Chris.
Rita, you may just have noticed that politics has skipped along at quite a pace over recent years, and here's the thing, the pace is getting quicker and quicker. A new Chancellor has become a former Chancellor while still being called a new Chancellor. And then the very prospectus of a new Prime Minister, large chunks of it, are fed into the shredder within weeks. And that is why tonight, hovering in the air around Westminster, there are big questions about the Prime Minister's own future. Turning up for another U-turn. The Prime Minister invited reporters to Downing Street this afternoon and scrapped one of her key policies that she's championed for months.
It is clear that parts of our mini-budget went further and faster than markets were expecting. So the way we are delivering our mission right now has to change. I have therefore decided to keep the increase in corporation tax that was planned by the previous government. This will raise £18 billion per year.
So a tax policy ditched, and her Chancellor too.
I met the former Chancellor earlier today. I was incredibly sorry to lose him. He is a great friend, and he shares my vision to set this country on the path to growth. Today, I have asked Jeremy Hunt to become the new Chancellor.
And one more thing, government spending will be cut compared to what was expected.
Our public sector will become more efficient to deliver world-class services for the British people. And spending will grow less rapidly than previously planned.
It never rains, but it pours. This was the now former Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng making an early dash home from a meeting of finance ministers in Washington last night. A long-haul flight, followed by the sack, is how his Friday went.
Hi, sir. Should the Prime Minister go next, Mr Kwarteng?
Hello. Good afternoon.
The formalities look like this. In his letter to the Prime Minister, he wrote, "You have asked me to stand aside as your Chancellor. I have accepted." In reply, Liz Truss wrote that they shared the same vision and, "I'm deeply sorry to lose you from the government."
Congratulations, Mr Chancellor. So nice to see you.
Jeremy Hunt is a former Health Secretary and Foreign Secretary and has tried to become leader himself twice. Now he is the fourth Chancellor of the Exchequer since July. Politics has been on fast forward this autumn. It's 5.5 weeks since Liz Truss became Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we're at the beginning of a new era, and as we contemplate...
It's 3 weeks since the now former Chancellor set out his planned tax cuts. And less than a fortnight since he ditched the cut for the best paid.
I felt, and the Prime Minister felt, that this was just a distraction on what is a very strong package.
And then, just yesterday, there was this.
And you'll be Chancellor and Liz Truss will be Prime Minister this time next month?
Absolutely 100%. I'm not going anywhere.
Perhaps it's little wonder the Conservatives' political rivals are sounding like this.
Another change in who is running the Treasury, another Tory Chancellor, isn't the answer to the challenges that we face as a country. The Tories are out of ideas, they're out of time. It's time for a Labour government.
This is beyond a joke. It was never funny, but Liz Truss has already, through her own decisions, crashed the economy and heaped misery on people who were already struggling with a cost of living crisis.
And even this former Conservative Chancellor reckons the government is incompetent.
I do not think they can resolve the political damage that has been caused. The Tory party has to be the party of competence in government. I'm afraid we've thrown away years and years of painstaking work.
So many questions for the Prime Minister, but she only asked 4 of us to ask one.
Chris Mason.
Excuse the bluntness, Prime Minister, but given everything that has happened, what credibility do you have to continue governing?
What I've done today is made sure that we have economic stability in this country. Jeremy Hunt, as Chancellor, is somebody who shares my desire for a high-growth, low-tax economy.
The questions from others were in a similar vein and brutal.
He has to go because of the fallout from it. How come you get to stay?
Clearly a difficult day. Can you explain to the public why you think you should remain as Prime Minister?
Will you apologise to your party?
Her answers were similar to the one I got, and then that was it.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Prime Minister, you're out of your depth, aren't you, Prime Minister?
And since that news conference this afternoon, let me share with you some of the reaction in private from Conservative MPs. It was awful, says one. I voted for Liz. Sadly, I think it hastens her demise, says another. I can't see how she survives, and she has trashed our reputation. At the heart of the grumbles, a sense of hypocrisy and inconsistency. Hypocrisy because she's got rid of her Chancellor, but she's staying on. Inconsistency because she's got rid of some of her ideas, and she's still staying on. The Prime Minister may have a new Chancellor this evening, but he confront many of the same problems, and her job is still far from secure. Chris Mason, BBC News at Westminster.
Well, as we've been reporting for the last 3 weeks, September's mini-budget led to turbulence on the markets, driving up the cost of borrowing and sparking a revolt among Tory MPs who urged the Prime Minister to drop parts of her economic plan in an attempt to shore up the UK's finances. So what's been the reaction today? Our business editor, Simon Jack, is here. Simon.
Rita, thank you. As you were saying, the sequence of events that led to the Chancellor's sacking and another huge U-turn on tax policy started on September the 23rd, when Kwasi Kwarteng delivered his not-so-mini budget that contained huge tax cuts with no real detail on how they would be paid for and no analysis from the budget watchdog on whether the numbers could add up. In total, the government announced £45 billion in unfunded tax cuts, and then the U-turns came. Abolishing the 45p tax rate for high earners, scrapped, saving £2 billion. proceeding with a big rise in corporation tax they had planned to scrap, saving £18 billion. But that still leaves 25 billion of that 45 billion unfunded. Now, the other measure was they were forced to bring forward the independent budget watchdog report from late November to late October. Now, this is how the financial markets have responded during that time. This shows how much it costs the government to borrow money long term. You can see this is September the 23rd, and you can see borrowing costs begin to soar. To such an extent, the Bank of England has to get involved to intervene to calm the markets. And that worked at first, and then borrowing costs began to go up again. And today you can see here that this is the reaction to the government's U-turn on corporation tax. And tonight, borrowing costs are actually higher than they were last night. Now, remember, business had been promised a whole new approach. Their taxes would stay low to promote growth, and now they're going to rise from 19% to 25% as the last Chancellor planned. So how do they feel about that? Well, earlier, the Director General of the Employers Group, the CBI, said businesses would not invest during this kind of turmoil.
I've been talking to businesses up and down the country in the last few days and today, and they're pretty clear that the first step before they even begin to start investing again is that we have stability in the markets. Now, once that's there, we will as a country have to get back to a discussion about what are the tax policies, what are the regulation policies, what are the immigration policies that will get the country moving again.
And remember, government borrowing costs affect all borrowing, including mortgages. This time last year, a typical £200,000 mortgage would have cost around 2%. Today, that is closer to 6%, meaning an extra £600 a month in mortgage costs. Now, most of that is due to interest rate rises around the world, but some of it is attributable to the mini-budget. Remember, 1.7 million people see their fixed mortgage deals end in the next 12 months, and it's also jeopardising some people's dreams of owning their own home, such as Guy Shaffi in Manchester.
But with mortgages, it feels like petrol station prices really quick to go up and very slow to come back down. And despite the fact that they've made a U-turn in this budget again, I feel like the damage has already been done. So as an example, for us, we would have to be paying around £700 a month more today than we would have around 3 or 4 weeks ago. And this really makes us have to reassess all of the criteria when it comes to buying our first home, when it comes to location, number of bedrooms, public transport links. So all of that has really gone out the window.
Well, for the markets, if Liz Truss was hoping sacking the Chancellor and scrapping £18 billion of tax cuts would instantly restore market confidence, she will be disappointed tonight. Rita.
Simon, thank you. The Prime Minister and the former Chancellor spent weeks defending their plans to cut taxes, plans on which Liz Truss campaigned during her bid this summer to become Conservative leader. Our economics editor, Faisal Islam, has been looking at how their economic plans unravelled and what is likely to come next.
Fundamentally, growth helps people fulfil their hopes and their dreams. And that's why our dynamic new Chancellor and I will be taking action in
The past 3 weeks was never known as Quasinomics. The now fired Chancellor was enacting an economic experiment known as Trussonomics.
And the Chancellor and I are in complete lockstep on this.
Trying to balance budgets was for Treasury bean counters obsessed with abacus economics. Growth was the answer. That experiment is now done.
There are limits to how far you can push tax cuts unless you're going to be clear about where you're going to cut spending. Equally, you can't just increase spending without increasing taxes. There are constraints, and we've learned the hard way that those constraints can really bite.
Good evening.
It undoubtedly helped Liz Truss, though, become Prime Minister, distinguishing her from the clearly prescient warnings of her leadership competitor, Rishi Sunak, in debates.
Rishi is talking about putting up corporation tax this autumn. He is talking about raising taxes at a time when there is a global economic crisis to the same level as France's corporation tax.
Your own economic advisor, let's just say, your own economic advisor has said that your plans would mean that interest rates would have to go up to around 7%. So just think what that means for all of your mortgages.
Those unfunded promises came to life in the form of the Chancellor's mini-budget. As the BBC revealed beforehand, the Chancellor refused an offer of an OBR independent forecast.
The problem is the budget that we had on Friday last week, the only thing it will do is probably add to inflation.
The market sold the pound and UK government debt by record amounts. The Bank of England had to step in.
To see a G7 country
go through the following: currency meltdown, yields melt up, reprimand from the IMF, rating agencies, change in policies within a few days, change in the Minister of Finance within a few weeks. That is just unthinkable. That sort of stuff doesn't normally happen in the G7.
And so does that mean there'll be scars from what we've seen, even if they win back some support from the markets?
There are already scars. If you had to refinance your mortgage, if you were trying to buy a new house, you've been hit.
It was clear that the U-turns were inevitable pretty quickly when independent forecasters were brought back in to make the numbers add up. Exactly 3 weeks ago, it took just hours after the mini-budget for Britain to lose the confidence of markets. The entire point of the U-turns, of the fact that Jeremy Hunt is now Chancellor of the Exchequer and not the man that was in there just 24 hours ago, is to try to win back that credibility. But that will take longer than days. At best, it will take months. If we're unlucky, it could take years. And so the scars of the Trussonomics experiment will continue to be felt in our borrowing costs for mortgages and business lending for some time to come. It's all a long way from the day of that mini-budget, a promise by both then Chancellor Kwarteng and PM Truss of growth and investment. Their dream of an economy unchained has for now left a Britain restrained. It's been a dizzying 24 hours of crisis drama, and no little fast too, quite literally going from a fight of a Chancellor to seeing his flight from that former Chancellor. But I'm left with this one reflection, which is that argument you heard so much from Kwasi Kwarteng and from Liz Truss, that the turmoil was all down to global factors. Well, there was some truth to that. The problem is that those global factors may well be getting worse if you listen to people here at the IMF in Washington, D.C. And the challenge for the new Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, is he doesn't just have to clean up the mess he's inherited and find tens of billions of pounds of further spending cuts or perhaps tax rises. He has to do that against the backdrop of the global situation potentially getting worse. Rita.
Thank you. Faisal Islam there, our economics editor. Liz Truss was voted in as Conservative leader and Prime Minister last month by just over 80,000 Conservative Party members. Our political correspondent Alex Forsyth has been talking to some of them in Witney in Oxfordshire to find out what they think of what's happened since.
In the market town of Witney, people were going about their daily business as the drama unfolded in Westminster. And at this town centre coffee shop, talk of political turmoil did filter through. Bob, a lifelong Conservative voter, has lost faith in the Prime Minister, and for him, today's actions didn't help.
I've always voted Conservative, but I will never vote Conservative again.
Why?
Why? Because I just think they're just greedy. Cutting taxes for the rich is just not right. There's a lot of people going to face poverty.
There is concern here about the everyday impact of economic instability on people and businesses. Mike thinks it's too late for Liz Truss to pull it back.
I think she's made so many errors that she's already lost the confidence of the people that she needs, quite honestly.
But for Jackie and Paul, there is frustration at what they see as attempts to undermine the Prime Minister.
They're just out to get rid of her, basically. It's just pressure from all around just to get rid of who's in power at the moment.
Boris should have stayed. I think that's the biggest mistake they made.
In this rural part of Oxfordshire, Witney's long been considered a safe Conservative seat, once the domain of David Cameron. But this deputy chairman of the local party, who didn't back Liz Truss in the leadership contest but was willing to get behind her, is now concerned.
We're the ones that are out knocking on doors, delivering leaflets. We need a stable government.
If, and of course it is still a big if at this stage, if Tory MPs did decide to replace Liz Truss with someone else, how would the members feel about that if they didn't get a say?
Personally, I wouldn't be too bothered about that, but I know a lot of colleagues, would be quite passionate about having that vote. But, that leadership contest was very long. We've got a cost of living crisis. We've got all sorts going on with the economy. It's up and down every day. If we don't change now, we're going to be in opposition for a very long time.
Bit nervous. We just don't know, do we?
For Amanda, who works in a boutique in the town centre, there are nerves about the economy and the uncertainty that brings. But in her view, it's too soon to pass judgment on the Prime Minister.
She came in, she'd only been in not very long, and then the Queen sadly passed away. So she's had quite a lot to contend with. So give her a chance.
While the Prime Minister tries to shore up support for her approach, it is voters who'll ultimately decide if there comes a point when time's up for her party. Alex Forsyth, BBC News, Witney.
Let's get another word from our political editor, Chris Mason, who's in Downing Street for us. And Chris, how do you assess the Prime Minister's position tonight?
Rita, credibility is one of the most prized assets in political leadership, and when it ebbs and drains away, it can be very, very difficult, nigh on impossible, to get back. And there are plenty of Conservative MPs tonight who say it has drained away from the Prime Minister and it will never come back. And they are doom-laden. They think they are destined to lose the next election, which brings us on to what could happen next, particularly if Conservative MPs decide that they want to move against Liz Truss and install someone else. Well, firstly, there are those Conservative MPs who say no, the party should stick with Liz Truss. Then there is a conversation about how you bring about a result that avoids, in the words of one MP I spoke to tonight, a lot of faffing about over the next few months, consulting Conservative members. In other words, MPs here coalescing around a chosen candidate. So what about Rishi Sunak, the defeated leadership candidate over the summer, another former Chancellor? Then there is Penny Mordaunt, another defeated candidate over the summer. She, though, is in the cabinet. And then a chap whose name you might just remember, Boris Johnson. What does he say or do? So there's a huge number of plates spinning here. It can be hard to dislodge a Prime Minister who doesn't want to go. Tonight, what we can say is we simply don't know what is going to happen next. And no one actor on the political stage is fully in control of events anymore.
Thank you very much. Our political editor, Chris Mason, there. To other news now, and around 200 people are reported to have been killed in Iran in the past month as mass protests have swept across the country. These are the faces of some of those who've lost their lives, children and young people that the BBC has been able to identify. The protests are one of the biggest challenges faced by the Islamic Republic's religious leaders since they came to power more than 40 years ago. The unrest was sparked by the death of this woman, 22-year-old Mahsa Amini. She died while in the custody of Iran's morality police, accused of breaking strict rules on wearing headscarves. Our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, reports.
A defiance that's dangerous. Brandishing headscarves, burning them, can get you arrested. Hundreds have been detained. This may seem so ordinary, but even walking without compulsory hijab can have consequences. Dunia Rod, in a white shirt eating breakfast, went to prison after she posted this photo. Across Iran over the past month, there have been unprecedented scenes like this. And this too, schoolgirls ripping photos of Iran's leaders. This defiance spread across society, across generations, on wider issues. And security forces have shot back with tear gas, metal pellets, live fire. One protester who, like most, hides her identity, told us it's no longer just about hijab.
They don't want Islamic Republic with all the violence it's doing, things that they have done politically to us, economically to us, and what they're showing as the face of Iranian to the world. And this is what we do not want it.
Power resides here in the Islamic Republic. The supreme leader, 83-year-old Ayatollah Khamenei, has said little, but he's blaming the West.
These recent matters are not homegrown and spontaneous. It's possible that the enemy used some pretext to pursue their agenda using provocative propaganda.
Wishful thinking. Those who back the government deny the Islamic Republic is at risk or even rattled.
There are very few protests. The country is quiet.
We see them every day, Professor Marandi. That's factually incorrect.
The United States and its allies try to undermine Iran in every possible way. Iran is more open than any of the countries in this region.
What we see says these protests aren't dying down, and the government isn't backing down. In London, a vigil to mark a month of defiance, to remember 22-year-old Mahsa Amini. Her death sparked this movement.
Protests like this have been happening in cities across the world over the past month. What's happening now in Iran, what happens next, matters in many places. But the course of events inside Iran will be decided there.
A young generation rises against an old clerical order. It's hard to say how and when this will end. For now, it's moving in ways Iran hasn't seen before. Lise Doucette, BBC News.
Police say a convicted sex offender, Neil Maxwell, who killed himself while on the run, is the prime suspect in the murder of the teenager Leah Croucher. The 19-year-old disappeared in 2019. This week, police discovered human remains in the loft of a house in Milton Keynes. The Rugby League World Cup begins tomorrow in Newcastle when England plays Samoa in what's expected to be one of the most competitive tournaments in its history. For the first time, the men's, women's and wheelchair tournaments will take place simultaneously, with organisers expecting record ticket sales. Our sports editor Dan Rowan reports.
And there's the Great Britain captain with the...
Half a century's passed since the last British success in Rugby League's showpiece event. Legendary captain Clive Sullivan leading his country to World Cup glory. These days, the 4 home nations have teams of their own. The captain of this year's hosts, England, telling me what victory on home soil would mean.
It's a huge opportunity, I think, for the sport. We've got a great sport and we just want more people to get involved in it. So a World Cup on home soil is the perfect advert, and I think that adds a little bit of pressure to us as a group, because you know, nothing will spark interest more than England being successful.
So you pass it, then run round the back.
Here at Portico Vine in St Helens, they're already benefiting from the World Cup, a social impact fund attached to the tournament, helping them build a new clubhouse and fueling passion for the game.
I just really like rugby better than football.
It's family to me. They include you in everything, and I'm proud to be here.
Here at clubs like this in St Helens, there's no shortage of excitement ahead of the Rugby League World Cup. But perhaps a true test of this tournament is whether or not it can help grow the sport and engage new audiences beyond its traditional heartland in the north of England.
Men's, women's and wheelchair.
Together for the first time ever.
With 3 tournaments culminating on the same weekend, this is the most inclusive World Cup ever, with 86% of matches staged in the north of the country. Organisers having to contend with a year's delay due to COVID and a cost of living crisis.
Have you sold as many tickets as you hoped? I think the pandemic really affected us. Refunds were really high during the pandemic, but we've gradually built back up. We'll start strongly on Saturday. We haven't sold every seat in every venue, but similar to the Women's Euros, similar to the Commonwealth Games, that we start well, we will build momentum.
Big smiles.
16 teams are in the men's competition, including debutants Jamaica and Greece, but with champions Australia having won 8 of the last 9 World Cups, loosening their grip on the trophy will be no easy task. Dan Rowan, BBC News.
Robbie Coltrane, the actor known for playing Hagrid in the Harry Potter films, has died. He was 72. His agent confirmed the actor died in hospital near Falkirk and described him as a unique talent who brought joy to children and adults alike. Robbie Coltrane also appeared in the ITV detective drama Cracker and in 2 James Bond films. David Silito looks back at his life.
Oh, hello. Sorry, don't wish to be rude, but I'm in no fit state to entertain today.
Ain't no one going to get past Fluffy.
Hagrid in Harry Potter. Big, gruff, fond of a drink, but blessed with a good heart. J.K. Rowling said there was only one person who could play him, Robbie Coltrane.
Well, I knew that she wanted me to play Hagrid in the film, and then I heard that she actually imagined me as Hagrid. But, you know, women imagine me all the time, you know.
In her tribute, J.K. Rowling said she'd never know anyone remotely like Robbie again. He was, she said, an incredible talent, a complete one-off, and I was beyond fortunate to know him, work with him, and laugh my head off with him.
Sorry, Governor. Apples and pears, tit for tat, I love London town.
And it was comedy in the 80s where he made his name.
I went down to the video shop yesterday, you know.
Among those he worked alongside Stephen Fry, who said he met him almost exactly 40 years ago, adding, "I was awe, terror, love-struck all at the same time. Such depth, power and talent."
Come back here, damn it!
And you could see it all in a drama like Tutti Frutti.
Don't get the stripy stuff. Stings my gums.
And his best work, Cracker.
I think I owe you an explanation.
Think again.
An apology.
You owe me nothing.
My life's a bit of a mess.
I had a wonderful time, Fitz.
The gifted but troubled criminal psychologist Fitz. He won a BAFTA 3 years running for this clever, hard-drinking character.
There are some questions so obvious that nobody ever bothers to ask them.
There were a few parallels with his own carefully guarded private life.
Put your sweet lips.
This is our only chance to go straight.
Look, the killer's not on the dole. You're not up and about at 7:30 if you're unemployed, right?
I terminated my uninterrupted categorization of the vocabulary.
Robbie Coltrane. Fierce, clever, funny, vulnerable. It's what made him so compelling.
The actor Robbie Coltrane, who died today at the age of 72. Time for a look at the weather now. Here's Nick Miller. Nick.
Rita, we will all see showers this weekend. We'll all get to see the sunshine at times too. It's been a mild evening in southern England. In Scotland, it's -1 at Balmoral at the moment, though temperatures will head up later in the night as low pressure moves in. That low pressure giving lots of showers to start the weekend. By Sunday, we're into something a bit drier, but briefly. Now, we're about to see some heavy downpours that could be thundery moving into Northern Ireland, western Scotland as the night goes on. The wind picking up too. Ahead of that, there are some showers across parts of England and Wales too. And temperatures probably at their lowest in Scotland over the next few hours before, as the breeze picks up, the cloud increases, the rain moves in, temperatures head up later. Rain out of the way quickly in the morning in Northern Ireland, but this area of heavy rain into parts of Wales and northwest England too. Sweeping eastwards, those showers diving further southeast too. Behind it, the sun comes out. You have a few hours of largely fine weather before the next rash of showers arriving towards the north and west into the afternoon. And all the while, it's windier across the UK. These are average speeds, but some gusts around Irish Sea coast around 50 miles per hour or so. And as for temperatures, well, in Scotland, just struggling into double figures. The higher hills may even see a bit of snow out of some of these showers. And then the showers will continue into Saturday evening, becoming confined to northern areas going into Sunday morning. We've got one area of low pressure on Sunday which is pulling away, another coming in from the southwest later in the day. There is this gap, though, that we find ourselves in on Sunday. Still blustery, showery in Scotland as we begin the day, but a lot of these showers are going to fade away. And for many of us on Sunday, it's fine and dry for much of the day. Here comes the next system, though, towards the southwest. That brings some rain towards parts of southern England, Wales, and especially Northern Ireland on Sunday evening. Rita, it's a weekend which is coated with low pressure, but for a time on Sunday, there is a soft centre.
Thank you very much, Nick. And that is it from the BBC News at 10. But there's more analysis of the day's extraordinary political events across the BBC over the coming days. You can get the latest from the BBC's political team, including a long read on the rise and fall of the Chancellor. That's on BBC News Online. Tomorrow, the Today programme on Radio 4 will bring you up to date with developments, and we're expecting to hear from the new Chancellor. And on Sunday, Laura Kuenssberg will be interviewing some of the key players in Westminster. But if you can't wait for all of that, Newsnight is getting underway on BBC Two. There's Victoria, and the news continues on BBC One, as now it's time to join our colleagues across the nations and regions for the news where you are. From the 10 o'clock team, it's good night.